What's the worst job interview you've ever had?
Story 1. I had an interview where I knew the answers I gave were solid and well thought out. I understood the technical side perfectly, but the interviewer kept sneering, being rude, and saying "really?" in a skeptical tone. I got the distinct impression that he hated me. About 20 minutes in, I thought about politely calling it a day and leaving, but in my innocence, I figured it would be good practice to stay. Around 40 minutes in, it was like a switch flipped. Suddenly, he was the nicest guy. His eyes lit up, and he started enthusiastically pitching the role and the company to me. He introduced me to the team, and then the director interviewed me. Both he and the team were lovely. Apparently, their interview technique was to be intentionally rude to see how candidates perform under pressure, and they had all been observing via camera. They said they were impressed that I remained so polite and calm throughout. They couldn't understand why I declined the offer. Edit. To save me replying to comments, I understand that pressure testing can be a legitimate interview technique. And while I felt deeply uncomfortable and my gut was screaming at me to get out, like when you're at a nightclub and just know the creepy guy is bad news, I figured that might have been what they were doing. However, to add more context, they already had my work history, including 10 years in the ambulance service, where I've performed resuscitations while the public yelled at me and even threatened me. I'm used to staying polite and professional under harassment and pressure. Nothing spreadsheet related, not even pulling all-nighters, will ever compare to that kind of stress. I'm known for staying calm and composed all the time, even if I'm exploding inside. My biggest objection was not realizing I was being filmed and then hearing them discuss my reactions right in front of me, as if I were some kind of movie character. It felt incredibly violating. Story 2. A bit of context. This happened in 2008, right after I graduated as a massage therapist. Since the economy was in the pits because of the recession, glad that never happened again, haha, massage therapists weren't exactly in high demand, so employers could afford to be picky. The only reason I was even considered for most of my interviews was because I had graduated from an accredited school. A lot of the places I interviewed it turned me down pretty quickly, either because I didn't have 10+ years of experience or because I didn't have the body of a supermodel with a massive chest. And I'm 100% serious about that. The worst experience by far was with a chiropractor who didn't even bother to hide his contempt for massage therapists. He showed up late, went into his office to check his mail first, and then decided to have the interview with me right there in the waiting room. He clearly knew he could hire any therapist he wanted and didn't care at all about how I felt. When we finally got to the topic of pay, he offered me minimum wage. At the time, most massage therapists earned around $20 to $30 an hour, and I was already working a dead-end job at a gas station, making $2 more than what he was offering. I pointed out how absurdly low his offer was, and he balked, saying I'd be paid as if I worked 40 hours a week, so it would even out. He also added that I'd be expected to clean the office when I didn't have clients, so I'd basically be an underpaid janitor too. Screw that guy. Story 3. This is copied and pasted from another post I replied to about how terrible Amazon is, but it fits this question perfectly, so I'm sharing it again. I got an interview with Amazon for a supervisor position. They asked me to drive an hour and a half to another city for a second interview, even though the location I originally applied to was only 10 minutes from where I lived. The pay they offered was good, so I thought it was worth it. I even took a day off from my current job. I drove there, only to find out they had given me terrible directions, which caused me to get lost and have to stop to ask for help. The place I stopped at rolled their eyes. Clearly, this wasn't the first time someone had asked. They knew exactly where to point me. Red flag number 1. I finally arrived and went to the interview. Over 100 people showed up. Red flag number 2. They were conducting a group interview for the supervisor role and told me they had accidentally invited too many people. Then they said they only had 10 supervisor positions available and asked if I'd be interested in a starting position instead for barely above minimum wage. Red flag number 3. But then it hit me. This was way too organized. They expected this many people because they had planned it. They had everything set up for a massive group interview and even asked me personal questions in front of a room full of strangers. Red flag number 4. I did my best, but I felt completely insulted. I drove home feeling cheated, 4 hours of driving and interviewing wasted. I spent all that gas, lost work hours, and went out of my way to another city just for them to say, oops. They planned this. I realized working for them would be a huge mistake. They showed zero respect for me as a person, a potential employee, or for my time, money, and effort. If they treated me like that before hiring me, why would they care about me afterward? It was clearly a deceptive bait-and-switch tactic, and I wasn't falling for it. Shady, shady, shady company. Shame on you, Amazon. I later sent them a letter declining the position. There was no way I was going to work for them. Story 4. Oh, I've got one. My interviewer showed up about 30 minutes late, and the first thing he said was, "You're the best-dressed candidate we've had all day." I was wearing a polo and khakis. He was a well-groomed man in his mid-50s, dressed in a button-down shirt and tie. When we got to the interview room, I expected this obviously senior guy to be the one conducting the interview. But when we arrived, the manager, you'll see why that's in quotes later, turned out to be a white guy in his early 20s, wearing a t-shirt and sporting a dyed purple mohawk. I was beyond confused, but I tried not to judge a book by its cover. The manager stayed seated when I went to shake his hand, didn't motion for me to sit, never asked for my resume, and just jumped straight into the questions. I'm not a super formal person, but even I was confused by how weirdly casual and dismissive the whole thing felt. The first few questions were normal: where I worked, where I went to school, if I lived nearby, basic stuff. Then he switched to job-specific questions and started with, "What would you do if you knew an employee was stealing?" Obviously, I said I'd report it. Stealing isn't allowed. He followed up, "Well, what if it was the cheapest item in the store, like a 99-cent water bottle, and they only did it once?" I told him that stealing is still stealing, and those costs can add up over time. Then he said, "Well, let's say it's your store, Gmoni 5100 supply store. What do you do?" I answered that if it were my store and one of my employees felt the need to steal a water bottle, I'd probably just buy it for them and tell them not to do it again. He pushed further. "What if you forgot your wallet? You forgot your wallet, and you know your employee is behind on rent, and their last paycheck hasn't gone through yet, so they haven't been paid." At this point, I was completely lost. What was even happening? Was he trying to get me to say I'd let someone steal? It felt like some kind of weird social experiment or prank. He noticed how confused I looked and just moved on. Then he said, "All right, let's test your sales pitch. Imagine someone comes in wanting 4 of the chairs you're sitting in at $25 each. How would you sell them the chair I'm sitting in for $100 each?" I had no idea what to say. If someone came in asking for a specific, cheaper chair, how was I supposed to convince them to pay 4 times that amount for a different chair that didn't even seem better? Especially when I knew nothing about the products. I don't even remember what I said, but it definitely wasn't coherent. After that, he ended the interview, without ever looking at my resume, called me by the wrong name, and sent me on my way. As for why manager was in quotes earlier, about a week later, a coworker of mine who knew someone who worked there told me that nobody at that store had a purple mohawk. All the district managers were black, and the older guy I met earlier was actually the store owner, the one who should have done the interview. To this day, I still have no idea who interviewed me. Story 5. I was fresh out of university and had spent months applying for hundreds of jobs, usually getting no response at all. So when I finally received an invitation to an interview, I was ecstatic. It was farther away than I would have liked, but it was in my field and could be valuable experience. Since I had to take public transport, I left with plenty of time to spare. Everything was going smoothly until I actually arrived at the company. I showed up 15 minutes early, approached the front desk, and politely introduced myself, letting the receptionist know I had an appointment with Miss A. She raised her eyebrows and said that this person never worked in the office on Tuesdays and had no appointment scheduled. Cue panic. Thankfully, I had the email confirmation on my phone, so I showed it to her. She nodded and repeated the same thing. I asked if she could please call the interviewer. She rolled her eyes, but made the call. After a few rings, someone picked up, presumably Miss A, and the receptionist nodded, hung up, and told me, "Wait over there," vaguely waving toward the entrance. A bit confused, I walked back to where I came from. There was no waiting area, no chairs or benches, so I just stood quietly. 30 minutes passed with no sign of anyone coming to get me. But during that time, several other young people showed up, all looking just as confused as I felt. About 45 minutes later, a young woman, maybe around my age, came down, called out 5 names, and gestured for us to follow her. She got my first name wrong, but it was close enough that I didn't correct her. The five of us followed her into a room with 5 tables and chairs already set up. We were told we'd be completing a series of assessments and were asked to hand over our diplomas, credentials, and passports, items they'd told us to bring. A multiple-choice test was placed in front of us, and Miss A left the room. It turned out to be one of those personality tests that barely take 10 minutes. Fine. Annoying, but fine. About 5 minutes in, Miss A suddenly swooped in, grabbed my diploma and passport off the desk, and started walking away. Cue suspicion. I immediately called out her name and asked what she thought she was doing. She said they needed to copy everything for their records. I quickly told her she would do no such thing. There was no reason for that until after a hiring decision. She told me that if I didn't comply, I might as well leave. I told her that if she walked away with my documents without permission, I'd have to assume attempted identity theft. She muttered something under her breath and returned my documents. The others in the room, seeing what happened, voiced similar concerns, and all the papers were promptly handed back. Miss A left us sitting there for another 30 minutes. When she finally returned, she collected the tests and announced we'd each have a 10-minute interview. For some reason, I was left for last. When it was finally my turn, I immediately noticed that the CV in front of her wasn't mine. She began by calling me the wrong name. I corrected her. Then she got my university wrong. I corrected her again. I told her she had the wrong CV, but she insisted she didn't. She kept reading off false information like, "I see you did an internship at ABC," and I kept replying, "No, I interned at XYZ." She was absolutely incorrigible. After what felt like an eternity, she glanced at my personality test results, drew a sharp breath, and said, "Yeah, I don't think you'd be a good fit for this company." I just raised my eyebrows and stayed quiet. She smirked and said, "Well, now you can correct me and tell me why you'd love to work here." I simply thanked her for her time, grabbed my things, and got the hell out of there. Easily the worst interview I've ever had. Story 6. September 11th, 2001, 10 a.m. I'd been watching the news that morning and debated whether to even go to my interview. But it was for a position at a temp agency in Ohio, so I figured it wouldn't be an issue. While I was waiting in the building's lobby, a custodian rolled out a TV and turned it on. This was just before 10 a.m. I remember because I watched the South Tower collapse only a few minutes before the recruiter came out and called my name. Her face was red and puffy from crying, with tear streaks, both fresh and dried, marking her cheeks. I immediately offered to leave and reschedule for another time, but she waved it off and said it was okay. She needed the distraction. Behind her was a computer terminal on a credenza. That's basically a workstation for you younger folks. The screen listed several cities in one column, names in another, and then 2 more columns with red or green indicator lights. The headers read connection and status. We went through the standard interview questions, but every few minutes she'd say, "Excuse me 1 second," roll her chair over to the terminal, and stare at the bottom of the screen for a bit. Sometimes she'd sniffle or wipe her eyes before returning to the interview. After the 3rd time, I gently asked if everything was okay. She tried to brush it off, then admitted, "No, honestly, it's not." She explained that she was close friends with her counterpart in the New York City office of the same staffing firm. They often coordinated when people transferred between offices and had built a friendship over the years. She said the first column of lights indicated whether each terminal across the country was connected to their internal network. The NYC terminal light was green, meaning it was still connected, but what really concerned her was that the status light was also green. That light only stayed green for 10 minutes after the last key press. Her friend's office was in the North Tower, which meant she had been at her desk less than 10 minutes earlier. By then, it was about 10:20 a.m., and the interviewer said softly, "I don't know why she hasn't evacuated. I hope this is just a system error." The terminal had a message board feature, so she thought maybe her friend was using that, but there were no new messages. Other employees had started threads asking if she was okay. None had been answered. At 10:28 a.m., we suddenly heard a collective gasp from outside the office, followed by crying and shouting. The front desk assistant appeared at the doorway and said, "The North Tower, it just fell." While I turned toward her, the interviewer had already spun around to face the terminal. When I looked back, she collapsed, literally fell sideways onto the credenza, and slid to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. On the screen, the NYC line was flashing, both lights now red. The front desk assistant knelt beside her, holding her as she cried. I quietly gathered my things and left. I had only met her 30 minutes earlier, but in that short time, we had experienced one of the darkest moments in real time, and I had no idea how to comfort her. I stopped at a sports bar on the way home and watched the coverage for the rest of the afternoon. I never called her, and she never called me. I think about her every year on September 11th. I used to remember her name, but I don't anymore. I just hope she's okay. Story 7. I was fresh out of high school, just trying to find a job to save money for college. I got an interview at a hotel and casino for a housekeeping position. Not glamorous by any means, but I was 18, needed the work, and was actually excited about it. I showed up for the interview dressed nicely, skirt, blazer, heels, ready to make a good impression. I was ushered into a large banquet room filled with around 20 to 25 people, all sitting in chairs facing a podium. My immediate thought was, oh no, this is an MLM. I hesitated at the door for a few seconds before thinking, whatever, I'm already here. Let's see what this is. That decision led to one of the most cringeworthy experiences of my life. After a few minutes, a woman walked up to the podium and announced that this was a group interview. What the hell? They started going around the room asking basic interview questions, one by one. It took nearly an hour and a half because there were so many people. Eventually, I realized this wasn't just for one job. It was a group interview for every single position in the hotel and casino. Cooks, front desk staff, dealers, servers, housekeepers, everyone. After the Q&A portion, the woman called out a list of names. About half of the people were taken to another room. My name wasn't called, so I stayed put. By now, it had been almost 2 hours and I really needed to pee. The woman came back and said that the remaining people, us, had made it to the second part of the interview. This part was with the department we had applied for. I and a few others were sent to housekeeping, where we met the manager. She told us we'd need to show them how we work. And yes, that meant literally cleaning hotel rooms. For an interview, while dressed in business casual, I was in heels, totally unprepared to scrub toilets and make beds for free. Still, I stupidly stayed. We had to clean bathroom floors on our hands and knees, make beds, vacuum, the whole deal. It lasted about 20 to 30 minutes. Oh, and we weren't allowed to use the bathrooms in the rooms we were cleaning, so I still had to pee. I was over it. Then came the third part of the interview. We were ushered into another banquet room. This time only about 12 of us remained. At the front of the room sat a long table with 5 or 6 people behind it. We were told they were the president of the casino and a few executives. Then they told us to stand in a circle and dance. Because apparently this was a fun work environment. I wanted to crawl out of my skin. When it was my turn, I limped into the middle of the circle and did some awkward little dance, completely miserable, feet aching, seconds away from either crying or wetting myself. After that, they made us sell a pen to the president, like some kind of cliché sales exercise. I must have blacked out from the embarrassment and frustration because I don't even remember what I said. After nearly 4 hours of this nightmare, they finally dismissed us. I sprinted to the nearest bathroom, peed for what felt like forever, and left. By the time I got home, I already had an email waiting for me. I didn't get the job. Story 8. I had an interview in 2019 that was an absolute nightmare. Awkward as hell from start to finish. A former colleague recommended me for a data science consultant position at their new firm, a high-end consultancy that practically screamed money. The office looked like something straight out of Suits. All glass walls, marble floors, and designer furniture. The job itself sounded perfect. They were building a new data science unit. My colleague was leading it, and up to that point, one guy had been handling everything alone. The offer would have doubled my salary and given me more creative freedom to bring my own ideas. I was genuinely excited. When I got there, I found out my colleague wasn't allowed to join the interview due to compliance rules. Instead, I met with the director of HR and the lone data guy who'd been running the show for the past 2 years. The HR lady clearly had no idea what the position involved. She was probably there just for compliance too. She smiled the whole time, nodded, and occasionally slid cookies across the table toward me. Meanwhile, I was trying to have a real conversation with the data guy, but he dodged every single one of my questions. 5 minutes in, I already knew this was going nowhere. He couldn't explain what he actually did all day. The discussion had zero flow. He'd say things like, for example, We have problem A we need to solve. And whenever he did, I'd tell him about similar projects I'd worked on and how I'd approach them. Actual, concrete answers. But every time I started to explain, he'd cut me off after 2 sentences to brag about his amazing statistics skills, then go off on incoherent tangents filled with random math buzzwords that didn't make sense in context. I sat there thinking, what is happening right now? Then it hit me. He had no idea what he was talking about. He didn't even have a STEM degree. It was painfully obvious he'd bluffed his way into the job, and since no one else at the company had a technical background, nobody had realized it. The HR lady just kept smiling, nodding, and handing out more cookies, completely oblivious. About 15 minutes in, the guy actually started pitching someone else for the position I was interviewing for. I stared at the HR lady, waiting for her to react, but she just smiled and nodded again. At that point, I seriously started looking around for hidden cameras because it felt like a prank. I wanted to walk out, but since I'd been recommended by my colleague, I didn't want to make them look bad. So I sat through another 50 minutes of this nonsense. At one point, the guy even asked me if I knew how to use a Google-like database search tool, basically asking if I understood Boolean logic. I have a background in physics and computer science. Not only do I understand it, I could build that tool from scratch. And the one he mentioned? It's so simple that an intern could learn it in an hour. I'd been using it daily for years. By the end, after dodging at least 15 to 20 of my questions, they had the nerve to ask me that standard closer. Do you have any questions for us? I just sat there, staring into the void, silently shaking my head. On my way out, the HR lady cheerfully mentioned scheduling me for a second case interview. She clearly had no clue what had just happened in that room. I just said, yeah, sure, and left. I walked home completely baffled, replaying everything in my head, wondering if I'd said something wrong, mixed up a name, or done anything to tank it. The whole thing had gone off the rails after 5 minutes, and I couldn't figure out why. 2 weeks later, I got a generic rejection email full of corporate nonsense. According to them, the data guy said he had no confidence in my skills. This, despite the fact that every time he presented a problem, I'd already solved it before and even explained how. Story 9. I've had plenty of awful interviews over the years. I'm older and have been in the workforce for a long time, but these are probably my top 5. For context, I have a background in accounting, finance, and HR. I once interviewed for a position with the federal government in a department that provided income relief, basically welfare-type programs. After going through a long series of pencil and paper tests, I was called back for a panel interview with about 12 staff members. Roughly 90% of the questions went like this. Interviewer: if you discovered that someone was insert vague but sketchy situation, would you report them? Me: if the rules stated I had to, then yes. Interviewer: well, what do the rules say? Me: I'm not sure. I've never worked here before, but I'd follow whatever rules or policies are in place. Interviewer: we need you to tell us what the rules would say in this situation. Me: are your rules publicly available? Interviewer: no, they aren't. Me: then I have no way of knowing how to answer that. The entire interview was basically them expecting me to know internal policies that weren't public. Unsurprisingly, I didn't get the job. B: I went to interview at a nonprofit, and the entire interview was just the woman rambling nonstop about office gossip, who was dating who was cheating, how one guy takes his coffee, and how much she hated her job. She didn't ask me a single question. After about 30 minutes of that, she stood up, shook my hand, thanked me for coming, and that was it. Never heard from her again. C: at a computer retail company with multiple locations, I was interviewed by 2 people who basically took turns insulting me. One of them criticized every job I'd ever had, told me I was stupid for working in industries like banking, real estate, and government, and yelled at me when I explained my career choices. The other one just glared and told me I blinked too much, probably because I couldn't believe what was happening. Toward the end, they handed me a 2-sided, 12-page job description. It was laughably impossible. The role required driving to 6 different locations every day and doing 6 to 8 hours of work at each one, in a city of nearly 1 million people. The commute alone would take hours. When I pointed out how unrealistic it was, they complained that everyone they'd hired before was lazy and couldn't handle it. I told them flat out that no one could do that job. To my shock, they offered it to me anyway, for 10 cents above minimum wage, with another 10-cent raise after 6 months if I somehow survived. They couldn't understand why I turned it down, even though it paid $8 less per hour than my current job. I once went to interview for a warehouse accountant position. The owner greeted me, shook my hand, asked if I was there for the interview, and when I said yes, he went completely silent. He didn't say another word. I tried to fill the silence by talking about my background, education, and experience, even asked him questions. Nothing. He just sat there staring at me. After 30 minutes of this bizarre one-sided interview, I thanked him for his time and left. Definitely one of the strangest experiences I've ever had. Finally, there was a construction company that seemed great at first. The woman interviewing me was funny, engaging, and gave a detailed overview of the job, the company, and the benefits. I was getting a really good feeling about it, until she suddenly asked if I knew how to fix or doctor the books, as in, hide large purchases and launder money. I told her that was illegal and that I wasn't comfortable with it. The interview ended immediately. Her exact words were, "You're of no use to us. Get the hell out." There are more, but those 5 definitely take the cake. Story 10. One interview was for an administrative position. After suffering through a terrible online Excel literacy test that didn't even allow keyboard shortcuts. Seriously, what? I asked the manager what an average day would look like. She said, "You'd make copies of exams for professors, put together course packets, keep track of student enrollment numbers, and make sure all of these things are properly filed." At that point, I thought, you don't need an administrative assistant, you need a student worker. So I asked how long the last person had been in the role and why they left. She said, "She was here about 4 months. We're just having a hard time finding the right person." Yeah, pretty sure you are the problem here. I thanked her for her time and asked to withdraw my name from consideration. Then there was another interview with a fairly large company for an entry-level graphic design position. It started in an absurdly tiny room, basically a broom closet with a desk. They handed me a packet and said I needed to take a test covering basic math, science, and English. It looked like a standardized test you'd take in school. The interviewer made me break the seal in front of him, then initialed and dated every single page. He said, "Sorry, they make us do this, so there's no cheating." I asked if that had been a problem before, and he said that sometimes people would try to get their friends hired by slipping them the test in advance. Then he added that most of the lower-level positions were filled by college kids, and it was a constant revolving door, so they wanted to make sure people were qualified. Halfway through the booklet, I stopped, looked at him, and said, "You know what? I'm sorry, but I can already tell this job isn't going to be for me," and started gathering my things. He got snarky and said, "How would you know? You haven't even interviewed yet. But with that attitude, I'm going to ask you to leave." I couldn't help but laugh a little. "You can't fire me. I quit." Story 11. I was sent to this interview through a recruiter I'd been working with for a while. From the start, I made it very clear to him that I wasn't looking for a job with tons of built-in overtime. I didn't mind the occasional extra hours, but I didn't want a position where it was part of the normal schedule or constantly expected. At one point, he offered me a job that required 55 hours a week, which I immediately turned down because that's exactly what I said I didn't want. I thought I'd made myself perfectly clear. Then he lined up another interview for me, a job that was technically below my skill level, but the pay seemed decent, and I figured I'd go along just to keep the recruiter happy. When I arrived, the manager gave me a full tour of the facility and went over the tasks, requirements, and expectations. But at no point did he mention what the actual work hours were. So I asked about the schedule. He vaguely said that sometimes they worked weekends. Fine, whatever. But when I pressed for specifics about daily start and end times, he dodged the question, saying the schedule was always changing and he couldn't be sure. At that point, I was already done. I didn't like the job, the manager seemed shady, and the lack of transparency was a huge red flag. So I kept pushing until he finally admitted the truth. They usually worked 6 days a week, 11 hours a day, and sometimes even a 7th day. I was honestly baffled. I told him right then and there that this wasn't what I was looking for, and that I had no idea why I'd even been sent to that interview. About 15 minutes after leaving, I called my recruiter to figure out what the hell had just happened. He started the call by saying he'd already heard the interview didn't go well, and asked why I was so hung up on the hours. Then he actually told me I was afraid of hard work because I didn't want to work on an assembly line for 70 hours a week. I couldn't believe it. That also explained why the pay seemed good. When you broke it down by the hours they expected, it worked out to below minimum wage. Story 12. I went to a company for an interview with the IT manager. The HR rep walked me back to the IT department, where the guy was literally buried in cables inside the server room. He looked completely surprised to see me, and the HR lady looked mortified. The guy just said, "Follow me." We walked down a long hallway, out a side door, got into his station wagon, and started driving. While we were on the road, he began firing off IT questions. No joke. The night before, I had read some random tech magazine article. This was a while ago, and one line stuck in my head. ODBC is a bloated driver. At the time, I had absolutely no idea what ODBC even was. So we're driving, and he suddenly asks, "What do you think about ODBC?" Without thinking, I blurted out, "It's a bloated driver." His jaw dropped. He looked at me, nodded enthusiastically, and said, "That's right." We kept driving until we pulled into a big grocery store parking lot. He got out, and I followed. I mean, I didn't know any better, and this was still technically my interview. We went inside. He bought a few packs of cigarettes, and we walked back to the car. I was in a full three-piece suit, sweating in my jacket, while he lit one up and smoked the entire 5-minute drive back to the office without saying a word. When we got back, he turned to me and said, "That was a good interview. You're hired. Come in tomorrow." I just said, "Okay." Backstory. This guy was infamous at the company. Everyone was afraid of him. He was mean to everyone, but I had just spent a decade in the military being yelled at daily, so his behavior didn't faze me. I just took it in stride, which actually seemed to blow his mind. People would pull me aside all the time asking if I was okay working for him. When we walked through the halls, others would literally look down or turn away. He was an absolute jerk, but also a certified genius. The stuff he built and the systems he designed were way ahead of their time. My technical knowledge skyrocketed within 3 months of working for him. I learned how to explain Ethernet protocols, describe data packet structures, and solve problems I didn't even know existed. Turns out, he was actually rich. He'd written a program as a teenager that controlled surface motion for aircraft. He only took that IT manager job to stay close to his kids after a divorce. Then one day, one of our NetWare servers, this was back in the day, had a volume wrap issue. It was NetWare 3.1 running on HP servers, and the problem came from HP using 1 megabyte equals 1000K, while NetWare used the correct 1 megabyte equals 1024K. The system was down, production lines were stopped, and hundreds of employees were waiting because the barcoding system was offline. He was outside in the smoking area with an engineering notebook, manually calculating, down to the 9th decimal place, how to resize the volume correctly. Meanwhile, the company was losing hours of productivity. I walked up and said, "Why don't we just shave 24 bits off every 1000 bits to get the volume back online and call it a day?" He exploded. In front of everyone on their smoke break, he yelled, "That's not how we do things here." We stayed until 2 a.m. fixing it. The next morning, the company president called him into the office and fired him on the spot. They put me in charge. I was terrified. I started a months-long migration to Windows servers. Windows 2000 had just launched, implemented Active Directory from scratch, and converted the Novell NDS environment over. It was chaos, but somehow I made it through. Learned a ton, got yelled at a lot, but it all became the foundation of my IT career. 2 weeks after he was fired, he actually called me at home. He said, "You were the best person I ever worked with. I hired you because you knew Microsoft was garbage, calling ODBC bloated in your interview." He would have hated knowing that I replaced all his systems with Windows. I'll never forget that interview, or that man. He was the only true genius I've ever worked with, and thank God I never turned into him. Story 13. Tough call, but I think the worst interview I ever had was the one where I had to fight the hardest not to burst out laughing. It was for a promotion within my own organization. Instead of asking normal interview questions, the interviewer said we'd be doing a series of role-playing exercises. The theme was always the same. She'd play the role of some aggressive, unreasonable person making insane demands, and I'd play the terrified new hire. And she'd ask, "What do you do?" The problem was, she made a point of specifying exactly who she was pretending to be each time, by name and title. By the third or fourth scenario, it was pretty clear she wasn't really interested in hiring anyone. She just wanted to mess with people. Then she said, "Okay, new scenario. Let's say I'm this guy. He's the executive 4 levels above her. Here's the thing. I'd been with the company longer than she had, and I'd actually met that executive several times. He was one of the nicest, most patient people you could ever meet. Always smiling, always eager to help, and known for explaining complex topics in simple, practical terms." She, however, had clearly never met him, because she proceeded to role-play him exactly like all the other jerks from before, shouting, snapping, and barking things like, "Why don't you know that?" and "Why are you such a failure?" I didn't laugh in her face, but I couldn't completely hide my smirk as I calmly answered her over-the-top scenarios. She did not appreciate that. Neither did the silent observer, sitting in the corner furiously scribbling notes, who started writing even faster when I smirked. Unsurprisingly, I didn't get the job. No great loss, though. The interviewer's position and the entire team she was building was dissolved just a few months later. As an interviewer, though, that's a tough one too. But I'd probably pick the candidate who showed up half an hour late, didn't bother offering any explanation or apology, acted bored the entire time, bombed half the questions, and then ended the interview by saying she wasn't interested in a starting salary of less than $150,000. It was for an entry-level position. The other candidates waiting in the hall were fresh college grads. The pay range had been clearly stated beforehand. It was generous, but definitely not that generous. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.